Nothing could have indicated that the Iceland Express flight from Warsaw, Poland on Friday, October 9th, 2009 would be eventful. Passengers were calm, and the flight attendants did not pay any special attention to a young girl in the cabin. About an hour before landing in Keflavik Airport, all of a sudden this girl became agitated and walked around the cabin, making threats, stamping down her feet, and hitting the interior cabin walls.
Well, yeah, you can safely say that she was quite rambunctious. She walked back and forth down the middle aisle, hit the overhead bins, and shouted at the passengers like a wounded animal. That's really how she was, high-strung and in a way double-sided. In one way, lots of rage and borderline craziness within her, and then in between she broke down and cried, very heavily. And then she wanted to be embraced and to get some kind of care and warmth. But then, again, all of a sudden she let go and became crazy again. So she was more or less out of it.
She did not listen to any pleas to calm down, so the airline attendants had to handcuff her arms and feet with the help of passengers.
That worked. She'd been trying to headbutt people and kick, but now she simply could not do that anymore. And then it was like something physical came over her. It was like she was passing out, and she started to breathe very shallow, and her eyes were locked, pointing upwards. There was some strong bodily reflex as well.
When the plane landed, the girl was exhausted and didn't fight back when paramedics moved her out of the airplane.
So we pondered what was causing this behavior of hers. We thought maybe that she was a drug mule and was getting second thoughts and afraid about the risk and consequences. Perhaps she had something within her body which had started to leak and was affecting her physically, some chemical effect.
We were notified about this case and to check if the girl had some drugs within her body.
According to her travel documents, she was a 22-year-old Lithuanian named Eva. The purpose of her visit to Iceland seemed to simply be a vacation. But shortly afterwards, the police discovered that there was more to that than meets the eye. Eva's story is very bleak. 1 year before this trip to Iceland, she had gone to a party in a block of flats in her hometown of Panevėžys in northern Lithuania. But when she wanted to leave, her companion had disappeared, and she could not leave. She was forcefully made to stay and was coerced into prostitution by a guy who kept giving her alcohol and drugs and beat her into submission. Sometimes she was driven to visit some men, and once she met a fellow who took pornographic pictures of her. She was forced to sleep with up to 10 guys a day. At nighttime, Eva sometimes tried to search for a passkey to leave the apartment, but could never find one. Eva had been brought up in a broken home. Her father was an alcoholic and violent and kept the family on a tight leash. Eva herself was in a bad way after long-term alcohol and drug abuse.
A woman arrived in the country last Friday with Iceland Express from Warsaw in an abnormal state. She behaved belligerently towards other passengers and said she planned to work as a prostitute in Iceland. Flight attendants had to tie her down, and police took her into custody upon arrival at the airport.
Eva was moved to a hospital, as neither paramedics nor the police knew how to respond. At the same time, 2 Lithuanians with a shady past were waiting in the arrival lounge at Keflavik Airport. They approached customs officials and asked about the girl they were meant to pick up. Customs officials said they would have to talk to the police for any information.
When this particular woman arrived in the country, she was taken to the police station and then to the Survivors Center to get some counseling. She had barely walked through the door at the center when some foreign men barged in and asked what was going on. We quickly sensed the immediate threat in all this.
The Lithuanians went to the police to find the girl, but received the information that she'd been taken to the hospital. "22-year-old Eva spent the night in the National Hospital in Fossvogur, where she was searched for any internal drugs, since her behavior had been so strange and the explanations of her travel so thin."
Our work is to receive people who are trying to smuggle drugs internally into the country. So this girl was X-rayed and came out clean.
She said from the outset that she was intending to work as a prostitute in Iceland, but also claimed that her friends were going to provide her some other employment.
She knew nothing about her own whereabouts and even suggested, while people were talking about how to help her, to simply send her back home, that she would catch a ride with the next lorry. Which tells us that she had no idea where in the world she was. She did not have a clue that she was on an island, and it was Iceland.
The following day, the Lithuanians from the airport showed up at the hospital and asked for the girl. The staff at the emergency wards did not like the looks of them. They did not appear to be helpful company for her. The staff called the police and said that some men were walking around waiting for the girl, and they did not look like a supportive lot.
Staff at the National Hospital were cautious about this, did not want to put the girl into contact with these men, and sensed actually that she was afraid of them, did not know them, and wanted nothing to do with them. So when they had to discharge her from the hospital, since she had recovered quite rapidly, the police were called once again to take her into custody, which they did.
Óskaði eftir því að lögreglan myndi sækja stúlkuna, sem að þeir gerðu.
A police detective went to the emergency ward and had a talk with Eva and asked her if she had some place to go, if she had some cash and other things. She did not answer very much and kept quiet most of the time, sitting in a chair, and she seemed exhausted as she had intermittently fell asleep. The policeman asked Eva if someone might pick her up, but she did not admit that. The policeman sensed that it was precarious to release her into the hands of the men waiting for her in front of the emergency ward.
The woman was treated terribly before she arrived in Iceland, so there were ample good reasons to consider her life to be in danger. And behind this was an organized crime ring about which we were learning more and more. So we started to look at rapists as choir boys in comparison. As you can see, this had become a serious and dangerous case.
Eva was moved to the police station on Hverfisgata, where she was repeatedly asked about the purpose of her visit to Iceland. She said either nothing or talked vaguely. She had not been inside the station very long when the policeman talking to her received information that 3 Lithuanians were now in the station's main entrance. 2 of them had been following Eva, but now they were accompanied by a new guy named Gediminas. They were angry and impatient and demanded that the woman be released. Reykjavik police had some difficulties because there were no grounds to keep her in custody any longer. She was obviously not a drug mule, but still these men kept following her and demanding to take her with him. The policemen did not like the outlook of the situation because they knew these Lithuanians were all connected to organized crime. After some consultation with the Keflavik police, it was decided that they would take the woman, since she had been accused of breaking several air travel laws with her behavior on the flight to Iceland. The police escorted Eva through a back door of the police station to a car that headed for a rendezvous with another police car from the Keflavik police. The Lithuanians were still waiting in the main entrance. During questioning in Keflavik, Eva finally seemed willing to tell the police about the true motive of her travels. She said that the reason for her fit aboard the airplane had been anxiety, as this was her first ever flight, and she had drunk 1 full liter of strong alcohol on board with an Icelandic couple she had not known beforehand. Eva said she had come to the country for work, as Tomas, her Lithuanian friend, was going to provide her some employment. She claimed she had never before been to the country and knew nobody there, but Tomas had secured some accommodation with some friends of his, and they would provide for her until the job was secure. Tomas's friend was to pick her up at the airport, and she thought that he would be Icelandic. She said she lived in the city Panavesis. She was single, had no children, and denied that she had ever been into prostitution. She had often tried that day to reach her friend Tomas, but being unsuccessful, she just wanted to return home. However, she had no return ticket and was short of cash. Eva accepted an offer to remain in the police station in Keflavik while the authorities inquired about a return flight for her to Lithuania. So she spent the next 2 nights in a cell. On Monday, October 12th, she met staff from the Center for Survivors of Sexual Abuse, and later that afternoon was moved to an apartment owned by Social Welfare in Keflavik. It was still obvious that the men who'd been waiting for her at the airport and the hospital and had demanded her release at the police station had not given up hope of getting their hands on her. That Monday, an Icelandic acquaintance of theirs called the police in Keflavik and asked about her. The young woman was allegedly safe in a social apartment in Keflavik. She had moved there on Monday evening, but the following day she had disappeared.
Yes, well, after this situation came up, we were convinced that she was in immediate danger.
Eva was gone, and the police were out looking for her. Nobody doubted that she was in danger, as the police suspected that she was in the hands of those men that had been shadowing her every step of the way. No similar case had ever occurred in Iceland. The police were now searching for a victim of human trafficking and the cold-blooded criminals that took advantage of a young girl's misery. The 3 Lithuanians that had been in the main entrance of the police station a few days earlier were called in for questioning. Police did not know that as soon as Eva had entered the social apartment in Keflavik, she quickly contacted Tomas, the guy who had sent her to Iceland. She had the cell telephone he gave her at the Warsaw airport. She telephoned him and said she needed help. She was all alone in Iceland and had nowhere to go. Tomas told her to wait where she was. He would contact his friends in Iceland who would come and pick her up. Eva waited by the phone, and within an hour, Tomas's buddies called her. But then a new problem arose, in that Eva could not give them a description of her whereabouts. She only knew she was in Iceland. They told her to go out to the street and find someone that could assist her. She complied, went out and toward a man that was stepping out of a car in front of a house on the street. She tried to make herself understood, but spoke next to no English. The guy on the telephone then talked to the Icelander in his fragmented English, claiming he really had to pick her up. The Icelander was very helpful, gave their location, and even allowed Eva to wait in his home. Shortly afterwards, 2 cars pulled up at the house in Keflavik. The Icelander escorted Eva toward one of them. She sat in the back seat, and then both cars drove away. The 3 men took her to an apartment in Hafnarfjörður, where 2 other Lithuanians were living. They gave her some food, fruit juice, and some movies to watch. They asked her what kind of job she was looking for and how much she wanted for pay. But then both of them decided to give her a try, as they put it. Eva was not locked inside, but saw no point in going out, as she had no idea where to go. She remained in the apartment for the next few days.
A Lithuanian woman that might have entered the country to work as a prostitute disappeared without a trace and is now being sought by the Keflavik police. They fear that she might be in danger.
After 3 nights in the apartment, one of the Lithuanians approached her and said he had seen some reports about her in the newspapers and that she needed to go away. He would move her to a hotel for one night, but then she could go to the police. By now, police and media were locked on the case, and the Lithuanians were starting to feel the heat. Eva was driven to a guest house, and one night's accommodation was paid for with cash in advance. That same day, a man called the police, claiming that he had met the woman in question in front of a guest house in Reykjavik. When the police arrived at the guest house, the man was waiting with Eva, whom he claimed to have met walking aimlessly in front of the house. Now at last, she seemed prepared to tell her story to the police. She gave her correct name and age, and described her life in Lithuania and her stay in Iceland. Eva was not actually her right name, but a false one in the passport she had received before her flight to Iceland. Her name was in fact Anna, and she was only 19 years old. She said she had not taken any drugs after arriving in Iceland, but traces of amphetamine were found in her blood. She claimed it had probably been mixed into the fruit juice the men gave her in the apartment, as she had felt comfortable and had a good time. She revealed having been forced into prostitution and having been kept in deplorable conditions. One day, however, she'd been told to get in a car, and she was driven to a guy named Thomas. He altered her appearance and dyed her blonde hair dark. Then he took her picture, which he used for a passport issued under the name Eva. Thomas drove Anna to Warsaw, Poland, and told her at the airport there that she was on her way to Iceland. He gave her a ticket for the flight, a small amount of money, and a cell phone. His friends would meet her in Iceland. Anna boarded the flight and flew to Iceland. It was obvious to everyone that this was a broken individual. She laughed at some difficult questions, but then broke into tears in between. She was anxious and described some terrible nightmares and repeated suicidal thoughts. She was no different from other victims of human trafficking who experienced psychological trauma after having been threatened and assaulted. The victims are often sent with little cash to other countries where they are illegal and therefore do not dare to notify the authorities. When Anna was discovered, the police were already on the trail of the men who were responsible for her arrival in Iceland. They were all arrested in the days that followed, including a group of Icelanders who were believed to be connected to the case. The investigation led to all 5 Lithuanians being charged. The 5 all pretended as if they knew nothing about the case. But Anna identified them, and they were spotted on surveillance cameras. In addition to that, a printout of their telephone calls was also most revealing. Gediminas was considered the leader. He had bought the flight ticket for her under the name Eva, which was in the falsified passport. Therefore, he must have planned her trip to Iceland from the beginning. Bit by bit, the 5 were tangled into their own web of lies. When they were brought in front of a judge, it was surprising that they smiled toward the cameras and made no attempt to cover their faces like the accused usually do in criminal cases. Reykjanes District Court rejected their nonsensical narrative and ruled that they had jointly transported Anna to the country with deception and had given her shelter simply to be able to sexually exploit her. The Supreme Court accepted that Gediminas had been the mastermind in the case. He was given a 5-year prison sentence, but the other 4 each received 4 years imprisonment.
Well, yes, these men all received sentences in the Supreme Court and started to serve them here. But after a while, they were extradited to Lithuania with a 30-year ban on re-entering Iceland.
Tomas, the man who organized Anna's prostitution, was never found, and nothing is known about his whereabouts.
Anna sought refuge in the Center for Survivors of Sexual Abuse and remained there under 24-hour police protection for weeks.
It would be tempting to claim that women simply come to us and consequently all will be good. They are offered help, and it would be great if they would accept it and build up a new and brighter life. But that is not the case.